Okay, welcome everyone to the Oxford seminar. This week we're hearing from B, who will maybe be answering the question, who cares about values?
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here. I'm going to present some work in progress that I've been developing with David Spivak. So let's get into it. All right, so I've got an exercise to start off with. I guess I would like you to think about somebody that you love very much. It could be your partner or your spouse or your mom or your dad or your child. And I would like you to either write down with pen and paper, or you can compile it in your mind. I would like you to write down what you value about this person, all the things that you value about them. And I want to give you, I don't know, just say 20 seconds to make the point, but go ahead. All the things that you value about this person you love. It's been about 20 seconds. I'll give you 5 more seconds to add 1 or 2 more values to your list of valuable values about this person you love. Now, my question is, how much more time do you need to complete the list? And I'm not going to wait for you to answer, but the question is to just get you to think about that. How much more time would you need to complete the list of all the things that you value about the person to basically add up to or explain or capture, however you want to put it, capture the care and the love that you have for this person? How long does the list need to be? How much time do you need to complete that list? So the argument I'm going to sketch is something like this, that the notion of values is an abstraction that's rooted in a deeper phenomenon, a deeper and more pervasive phenomenon, one I'm going to call care. I'm going to say something like values are abstracted extractions from caring that can actually paradoxically detach us from our caring. Another slogan we came up with is that we need to take care when we appeal to such values. We always need to ask, who cares about values? I'm not going to answer that question. My point is to ask that question. Here's a mouthful, but let's try it on for a mouthful. What is caring? Caring is a precognitive attunement to significance that resists complete formalization while enabling responsive involvement in judgment. And I want to say in a shorter way that caring is a way that we're involved in the world. Caring is a way, to use a Heideggerian expression, a way of being in the world. Here's another list of abstractions about caring. It's not just a feeling of affection. Often when I talk about care, people confuse it with liking somebody or feeling good about something. Yes, affect comes along with care, but it's not the core of it. It's not its essence. This is a way David and I were starting to talk about this. Caring is like an activity of tending and attending to what matters. That definition is circular, because what matters is already kind of building in something that's important or something that's worthy of care. So the activity of tending and attending to what matters has a circularity to it, but it's not a vicious circularity. It's a circularity that exhibits the phenomenon that we're talking about. Care doesn't start out of nowhere. We always care. We always start our caring from where we're at. The kind of beings that we are, the kind of agents that we are such that when we arrive to having self-awareness, when we arrive to being a self-aware agent in the world, things already matter to us. So caring you could think of as, here's more mouthfuls, an attuning and cultivating that tends to bring things out at their best. Or this is one that David was playing around with that I think needs some more finessing, but I want to include it on the list. Caring tends to actualize potential. So you can think of raising kids, you can think of taking care of a garden, you can think of, I don't have kids, but I do play in bands. You can think of what it's like to be in a band. It takes a lot of care, a lot of tending and attending. What are values? Values attempt to grasp and translate the importance of what we care about into a precisely legible and quantifiable value. My slide is messed up. The grammar, I did too many edits without reviewing it. Values attempt to grasp and translate the importance of what we care about into a precisely legible and quantifiable, say, definition. And it's not a coincidence that what we name the things, the quantities that we put into a spreadsheet, we name those values. An inert entry onto a spreadsheet. It's not a coincidence that we call what we put into a spreadsheet a value. And I want to tell you a little bit of the history of this concept of value to back that up. The legibility pretense. That's a phrase that tries to capture what I'm saying here, that care can be totally legible and translated without remainder into a list of values, is what you could call the legibility pretense, that caring is nothing more than valuing. Caring is nothing more than value. The fact that values can be translated to the quantified value in a spreadsheet is certainly part of their usefulness. And statements of our values can help us make plans, calculate between alternatives, and control for and evaluate specific outcomes. This is the part of the talk where I acknowledge that values and having statements of values and having agreements about what our values are as an organization or as a family or as an individual, they are useful. The problem is when our preoccupation with values and also the preoccupation with the way the notion of values shows up. For example, in the conversation about AI is supposed to align with human values. The problem is when we get preoccupied with values and forget how they're rooted in care. What if the notion of values, because it often comes in the plural, and I think that is meaningful, and I'll explain why later. What if the notion of values is an inadequate abstraction trying to capture, and inadequate to capturing the importance of what we care about? In the AI alignment discourse, this is sometimes called there's something called the specification problem, so that it's hard to specify. You specify a value, and then the system that you're training satisfies that value, but in a way that you didn't anticipate. So it seems like you didn't specify your values correctly. So what if the specification problem is not just a technical shortfall, but it reveals a fundamental flaw in relying too heavily on the notion of values to translate care? This is just a summary. I'm not going to bother to read it. I've just been saying these things. This is my slogan again, that values are abstracted extractions from caring that can detach us from caring. A couple of examples, because I've been talking in big sweeping philosophical mouthfuls. The preference boxes on a dating app that sort people into stereotypical types or profiles, rendering what they care about into data for the algorithm. A corporation's values that can become hypostasized, kind of reified, ossified, and end up creating harm, like Amazon's amazing value of customer satisfaction, giving rise to dangerous or humiliating worker conditions. Okay, this is the second part of the talk. All that was kind of intro to the question between the relation of value and care, starting to problematize the notion of value that is so taken for granted in many conversations today. And now I want to do a sort of historical excursus about the emergence, the historical emergence of the concept of values, specifically as it became consolidated in the 19th century. And I'm going to bring out two characteristics of the concept of values that pull in different directions, but that still are embodied in the concept of values as we take it for granted today. So there's objectifying and subjectifying characteristics of values. I want to just read a couple of pages because I'm happy the way I wrote this part up. Values as a concept emerges as one of the dominating concepts in 19th century thought. The 19th century saw an awe-inspiring consolidation of the effectiveness and prestige of the mathematical natural sciences. Tremendous advances were made in chemistry, electromagnetism, thermodynamics, and biology. This put tremendous pressure on the other disciplines of the day, especially newer fields such as economics, history, sociology, but also logic and good old-fashioned philosophy, to prove that they too could operate with a rigor and precision matching that seen in the natural sciences. The concept of values plays a pivotal role in these debates in the way that these disciplines attempted to establish themselves as bona fide sciences. The notion of value was central to the whole intellectual ferment of this period, and it remains today inextricably linked to the aspirations and prestige of scientific detachment and objectivity. I want to bring out two features of the concept of value that emerge when we place it in this historical context of its origins. I guess it's not really its origins. You already had Descartes talking about value in a new way. You already had John Locke talking about value. But it's really in the 19th century where it gets consolidated in these characteristics that I think still shape it. So objectification, or let's see. Nope, not ready to show that one yet. The language of values was put to use by thinkers in the 19th century who were particularly concerned to prove their discipline's worth and scientific status. We see this starkly in the deployment of the term value in the newly introduced social sciences of economics, history, and sociology. Just look at the foundational role that the notion of value plays in the nascent fields of economics and sociology, and in the writings of David Ricardo, Karl Marx, and Max Weber, who's on the slide here. We see it too in the corresponding philosophical debates about the specific methods of these newly emergent human-focused sciences. And this is the debate, the German terms, the methodological strife between the natural sciences and the social sciences. And the German word for social, what we translate as social sciences, is Geisteswissenschaften, and it means more like sciences of the spirit. We sometimes call them cultural sciences, social sciences, human sciences. But it was a huge debate in the 19th century about whether or not the social sciences or the Geisteswissenschaften could have a method that could lay claim to a kind of knowledge of the same kind of rigor as the natural sciences. Many important, though now really obscure, philosophers of the 19th century, such as Wilhelm Windelband, Wilhelm Dilthey, and Heinrich Rickert, gave themselves the job of establishing the degree to which these new human sciences could be capable of delivering objectively valid knowledge about their subject's matter, human beings and their doings, in such a way as to secure their status as rigorous sciences. This concept of value was central to all of these attempts to establish social sciences as sciences. And the most striking culmination of this is the theoretical methodological work of Max Weber. Max Weber introduced a notion still used in sociology between value relevance and value neutrality. And he argues that social science, I mean, actually, he thinks this applies also for natural sciences. And it's an interesting question about what work he's doing here to establish this as a particular characteristic of the social sciences. It's a continuum. So the work of social science needs to be value relevant because it is the values of the historian or the sociologist that guides them in selecting the historical or social events that are worthy of their attention. So there's innumerable events that happen in human life How do you choose the ones that are worthy of scientific study? It's going to be what seems important to you. The values of the sociologist are guiding them in the selection of the social phenomena that they're going to study. There's no way just to look out there and see in a disinterested, objective way what's going on with human beings that's worthy of study. If you're interested in your interest in the million or innumerable events that happened that constituted, say, the French Revolution, which ones are important for our understanding of it? It's going to be guided by the values of the scientists. That's what was Max Weber's argument. But still, the scientists should be value neutral. They shouldn't be pursuing a specific ideological agenda. So that's one of the ways that values gets crystallized in these debates of the social sciences at the time. So after Weber, thinkers like Michel Foucault and the Canadian philosopher Charles Taylor argued that and showed that the emergence of the social sciences was coincident with and in the service of greater and greater rationalization, bureaucratization, and the systematic regulation of human life and work in the 19th century, with the rise of institutions like industrial factories, hospitals, public schools, prisons, and other institutions. The concept of value emerged as deeply intertwined with a detached scientific attitude towards human life, an attitude that aims at knowledge and prioritizes regulation, efficiency, and optimization. The doctrine that there exist some things that we call human values gains its popularity and acceptance in the context of the project of determining human life, history, and society as viable objects of rigorous scientific study and control. It's no coincidence that values are what we enter into a spreadsheet. Okay. The next one I'm not going to read from the paper that I wrote, the notes, but I'm just going to introduce the subjective angle on value by giving a quote from a really interesting conservative scholar named Gertrude Himmelfarb, who is commenting on Max Weber and observing in a book that she wrote in the early 90s about the spread of the talk of values among liberal society. She points out that the notion of values brings with it the assumptions that all moral ideas are subjective and relative, that they are mere customs and conventions, that they have a purely instrumental utilitarian purpose, and that they are peculiar to specific individuals and societies. She's commenting about the way values show up in the writings of Weber and Friedrich Nietzsche. And Nietzsche is important here because he's the one that really systematically tried to argue that traditional religious and moral systems really were nothing more than values posited or willfully created by different individuals and their struggle to assert their power and achieve social dominance. So the thinkers of the 19th century then took this kind of outside-in view on human life when they're analyzing what it is the nature of being human and the nature of human moral and religious systems. And they use the notion of value to explain it. So viewed with a certain sociological detachment, as well as in light of the discoveries of natural science and the demystifying tendencies of the Protestant Reformation and the brutal devastation of religious war, traditional Judeo-Christian and Enlightenment justifications of human morality appeared as just a bunch of values that the individuals had posited. That's Nietzsche's argument. The quest of utilitarianism, another child of the 19th century, to find an objectively valid method for quantifying and measuring subjectively defined human well-being is part and parcel of this whole historical development, as are the attempts to turn economics into a quantitative science by positing an extraordinarily narrow, utility-obsessed Homo economicus as its subject. Okay. So today, what does it mean to say today values have a subjectivist kind of connotation as well as the subjective connotation that the sociologists saw? We see values as items on a checklist of preferences that individuals or organizations have or possess in some way. We say people have their values, organizations have their values. We have values, rank them on a table, wear them on a t-shirt, edit and delete them as we see fit. Values are something that we have, but caring is something that we do. So the concept of value, both in its objectivizing and subjectivizing dimensions, enacts this outside in or sideways on observer's perspective of human life. And the concept of value that we have today retains these connotations, which influence our thinking and conducting of human life accordingly. This brings me to a just summary about some of what Heidegger observed about technological modernity. He's coming out of this same tradition of Nietzsche and Weber and further developing what they were worrying about and observing. And in his interpretation in his essay called The Question Concerning Technology, he reads technological modernity as involving a kind of compulsive efficiency and optimization. One of the things it means to live in a technological age, according to Heidegger, is that it's just obvious that we need to be efficient and compulsively optimize for better and better results. No one questions that. We relate to life and the world itself as a series of problems to solve with ever greater efficiency. An orientation to values, as we take it for granted, is part of this overall picture. So a focus on values easily lends itself to this narrow utility maximization perspective that attracts our attention and gives us powers of prediction and control, but it risks turning us away from what really matters. One of my favorite examples to try to illustrate this point comes in perhaps the greatest reductio ad absurdum of Hollywood love story, which is Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo, where you have this subplot where the James Stewart character falls in love with a woman that reminds him of a woman that he used to know, and he compulsively optimizes her to kind of look like and remind him more and more of the woman that he had known before. And as a projectionist, when I used to show this movie to younger audiences, you used to sometimes cringe at the way they cringed and laughed at the movie. They were laughing at the movie. They couldn't believe how ridiculous this whole game was and how Hitchcock could even show this on the screen. Isn't it ridiculous? Isn't it great how much our morals and attitudes about gender equality has evolved? And they're right. But what they're missing is that I think Hitchcock himself was showing how ridiculous this is, how real love is incompatible with this notion that this drive to optimize and control the relationship. So you cannot optimize, you cannot properly tend to what matters while trying to optimize and control it. I think factory farming reveals the same thing. Industrial agriculture shows us another angle on this. Transactional friendships are not the real kind of friendships we want to have. If someone's trying to optimize and make your relationship as efficient as possible, you might want to get other friends. Okay, I couldn't help but start to see this kind of attitude a lot in the conversation that goes on about AI. And this is the AI 2027 report that came out earlier this year. And there is this kind of dream baked into the core of this attitude about AI, this dream of creating an all-knowing system that can solve all problems of human life. And so this is a remark that Scott Alexander made in the Dwarkesh Patel podcast. So this is not a quote from the report itself, but it was an interview about the report. And they're in a riff about what would we do when AIs become so good that they can take over all human work. And they're postulating the plausibility of universal basic income. And so that's the context of the story of this anecdote. And so this is a kind of off-the-cuff remark, but I think it's very revealing of the attitude that is very pervasive in a lot of conversation of the AI industry right now. Hey, we do have a artificial superintelligence over here answering all of our questions, doing whatever we want. You would think that people could just ask, hey, super intelligent AI, where does this lead? Or what happens? Or how is this going to affect human flourishing? And then it says, oh yeah, this is terrible for human flourishing. You should do this other thing. Instead, if we know with certainty, because the AI tells us that this is just a stupid way to do everything, is less efficient, makes people miserable, is that not enough to get the political will to do the UBI or not? The idea here is that they're worrying about kind of labor unions, say longshoremen or medical doctors will have a strong hold on their jobs. And just because they want to keep their jobs, will resist giving over all jobs to the AI and resisting universal basic income instead. And so the argument here is like, well, look, can't we just get these people to listen to the super intelligent machine? And if that machine could say, hey, I know all the answers, I've crunched all the data, and I've got your values figured out, what you guys should just give up your jobs and accept the universal basic income. This reminded me of a story I just read. This is a story from Isaac Asimov called The Last Question that the people at the Berkeley Institute introduced me to recently. Oops. Okay. Ask the microvac. I can't really see it. Okay. Ask the microvac, wailed Jaredette 1. Ask him how to turn on the stars again. Go ahead, said Jaredine. It'll quiet them down. Jaredette 2 was beginning to cry also. Jared shrugged. Now, honeys, I'll ask Microvac. Microvac's the name of their supercomputer at this point in the machine. Don't worry, he'll tell us. He asked the Microvac quickly, print the answers. So they're asking about, is there a way to reverse entropy and preserve the energy in the star that keeps them alive? They want to overcome death as a problem. And so they're asking the supercomputer how to solve this final problem. I'll ask the Microvac. Don't worry, he'll tell us. He asked the Microvac, adding quickly, print the answer. Jared cupped the strip or thin cellufilm and said cheerfully, see now, the Microvac says it will take care of everything when the time comes, so don't worry. Jaredine said, and now, children, it's time for bed. We'll be in our home soon. We'll be in our new home soon. Jared read the words on the cellufilm again before destroying it. Insufficient data for meaningful answer. So I think this story reveals something about the bankruptcy of care in a technological society that constructs itself in a certain way, that relates to human life as a series of problems that can be solved, that sees what we find important as values that could be learned by a machine, that we could give over the authority for how to live our lives to, and look to it to design our lives for us. As the story progresses, people lose their names. They're designated by numbers, and they're diffuse, spread throughout the cosmos. They seem to have this boring, meaningless way of existence, but they're still worried about overcoming death as the final problem to solve. And the rhythm and the narration of the story, I think, reveals this sense of a bankruptcy of care when we relate too heavily to life in this technological way, in the sense that Heidegger was pointing out, that if we think of life as a series of problems to solve with ever-greater efficiency and optimization, and the notion of values that have come down to us from the 19th century is part of that picture. All right, how am I doing on time? Let's see what we have.
About 20 more minutes.
All right, cool.
Yeah.
All right, so this is kind of summarizing. Values I'm thinking of as objective representations of care that abstract from world-embedded responsiveness into measurable, comparable properties. Valuing is an activity of stepping back and out to measure and state what matters. This is more of my philosophical mouthfuls. I don't know how helpful they are. But I have more examples to try to illustrate them. Care is a precognitive attunement to significance. I said this one already, that resists complete formalization while enabling responsive involvement in judgment. Caring is being drawn to tend and attend to what matters. It's a way of being in the world. I'm not going to list, I have this longer of a laundry list of care here. I'm just going to run through them. Caring distinguishes between what is important and what is trivial. Caring is connected to our vulnerability and mortality. The vulnerability, I think, that we have specifically as mammals, that we're born as vulnerable little babies, and we end our lives as vulnerable elders. And there's something about the mammalian way of being that has to gather its resources and gather its togetherness to thrive and survive. And that this, in the end, ripples through our way of being and also gets connected to the way we live our lives and start to articulate things as having importance and triviality in language. What we care about possibly exceeds our reflective awareness. We're not necessarily fully aware, cognitive, self-conscious about what really matters to us, though hopefully we get there. Caring can lead us to do things that might go against reason and morality. Caring shapes our will. It's not something that we decide to do. This is part of the reason why we have the expression that you fall in love. And it's also in the philosophical literature about this stuff. People love to examine the case of Martin Luther, who supposedly uttered the phrase, "Hier stehe ich," here I stand, I can do no other. When he was driven to he was kind of driven because he cared so much about the corruption in the Catholic Church, he had to do something about it. So caring gives you something you've got to do. It's not something you choose just because you want to. You've got to do something. You feel drawn to be involved in whatever's drawing your care. It's also embedded in socially shared forms of understanding. It's not possible for us today to care so much about the sale of indulgences that really drove Martin Luther crazy, but we have our issues. What's the role of AI in society? What's the role of AI in schools? What are we going to do about the climate crisis? We have issues that matter to us today that can be historically specific, socially embedded concerns that attract people's care. And caring is not just in the head, it's also embodied in our manners and our dispositions. It shapes your basic being in the world. Yeah, so the way you care, your caring is something that shapes, the way the phenomenologists talk about this is that caring shapes the field of significance that you're in. When I walk into the practice space of my band, what stands out to me immediately is how neat it is, because I'm the kind of person who takes care of the room. So immediately it pops out to me if there's leftover beverage cans or if there's garbage flyers on the floor. The next thing that pops out to me is the drum set. It's been taken care of because I have my own personal drum set set up for communal use. And the next thing that pops out to me is the decorations and lights on the wall because I've taken a lot of care to put together a cool vibe in the room. Different people who are gripped by different concerns walk in that room and it pops to them differently. The guitar players are drawn to their guitar gear to see, is it doing okay? Maybe someone else put up a poster on the wall. They want to see if it's got a good spot. Maybe they noticed they left a beer can sitting out there and they know that I'm going to be upset about that. So that might pop out at them. So what we care about is embodied and embedded in the way our situation just pops to us, shows up to us. It's not just an idea in our head. So I'm giving more philosophical mouthfuls. Caring provides our orientation in the world. What we care about solicits our attention and action, involving us in the world and with each other. When we care, we are drawn to tend and attend, to nurture, to cultivate, to bring a thing out at its best. And this can sometimes pit us against reason, utility, common sense, and morality. Care itself is morally neutral. Evil people care about their projects too. Or what shows up as insanity can be someone being driven by what they care about. And the left here is the Caravaggio painting of Abraham get ready to sacrifice his son Isaac. This is the example that Kierkegaard uses in his book Fear and Trembling to bring out what's at stake when somebody deeply cares about something that might go against the dictates of their society. Namely, sacrificing one's child rightly goes against dictates of society. And Kierkegaard's point is not to glorify infanticide, but to say having this kind of unconditional, deep commitments is not so easy. And it's his case in particular, he was talking about 19th century Protestants who thought being a Christian, having the commitment of being a Christian was this easy, feel-good thing. And he was trying to tell them it's not that easy all the time. When you really when you're really committed to something, you might got to do something that looks crazy to everybody else. And I think that still holds. This is because I'm a drummer. I was attracted to this movie where the drummer has this bald guy yelling at him all the time because he's trying to become the best drummer of all time, or one of the best jazz drummers around. So he's always maniacally practicing. And it's a more watered down example of the kind of thing Kierkegaard saw, which is that being deeply committed, having a deep sense of care and connection to a way of life or a person or a project can also, it's not all fun and games. It can also make us do things that look crazy, might go against morality or common sense. And I think that's important for us to keep in mind. And it's one of those sometimes tragic dimensions of being human that gives our lives a sense of purpose and meaningfulness. I'm going to run through this crazy list real quick, okay? This is a list of different ways that human beings have understood autonomy and well-being in the history of Western thought. And I'm kind of channeling what I've learned from some of my teachers here. I put the books on the slide, Hubert Dreyfus and Sean Kelly, and Charles Taylor's book, The Sources of the Self. This is a basic Heideggerian argument that what it means to be human, the basic concerns of what it means to be human and what we care about as human beings changes historically over time. And that our modern obsession with values and utility and efficiency is a kind of outgrowth an outgrowth and a sort of distortion of this longer history of being human. And it's interesting to place it in this larger context, but I can't really do justice to all of this here, which is why I suggested to myself to skip this part. But it's kind of fun. So in the Homeric world, you had not being a utility maximizer or a rational agent as the most important way of life. You have Odysseus in the Odyssey being appropriately cunning and receptive to the influence of the various gods. In Plato, we get this picture of human well-being as a harmony in the different parts of the soul. You've got a wise part of the soul, you've got an appetitive part of the soul, and you've got a spirited part of the soul that cares about what other people think of you. And justice and well-being in the individual is having those three elements of the soul aligned with the wise part ruling. And that also is what constitutes justice in the city. And you need justice in the city to have justice in the individual soul. So that's what it looks like for Plato. Aristotle has a different version of what it means to be living well, but for him, living well also means some version of living in accordance with the virtues that make you a good citizen of an Athenian society. Living well with reason in accordance with the virtues. I'm jumping millennia or so, but Dante has this picture of what it means to live a good, important human life is to be in alignment with the love of God that structures the cosmos. And here are the closing lines of the Paradise. Here powers failed my high imagination, but by now my desire and will were turned, like a balanced wheel, rotated evenly by the love that moves the sun and the other stars. So he got in tune with, absorbed into the love of God, which was the moving principle and the way the universe itself was structured, was accordance with the love of God. And the purpose of a Christian life in Dante is to get in touch with the love of God that structures the cosmos and to give yourself over to it. I'm not going to read that, but it's interesting. Descartes brings us a picture of self-sufficient doubt and the self-sufficient knowledge, that he can doubt everything but himself doubting, and he has the power to guarantee his knowledge. This is the moment at which our modern notion of value starts to enter the picture, because the world itself is no longer the enchanted cosmos that Dante inhabited, and a cosmos structured by the love of God, that you can look out and you can see the moral significance of phenomena, and if they were evil or good, depending on how close they were and receptive they were to the love of God. With Descartes and the moment of the scientific revolutions of the 17th century, the universe becomes a machine. Meaning gets drained out of it. All meaning is now thought to reside in the head of human beings. Meaning and value then start to be something we project on the world. So values, our modern notion of values enter the picture here. This is the moment that Max Weber called the disenchantment of the world. The world becomes mechanized, it has motions we can predict and control, predict and mathematically map, with the orientation to eventually controlling them with our technologies. And value then becomes something in our head that we project on the world. This is the image then which Kant comes in and has a picture of autonomy as giving ourselves a moral law. Hegel's got a social variation on this, that the giving ourselves moral law has to happen with the equal recognition of others. And I couldn't help put this line from Bertrand Russell in there, even though I think it's a really cruel misunderstanding. He said, freedom in Hegel is freedom to salute the police. But it's not that simple. That Hegel does have a social understanding of freedom. Humboldt and Mill have this romantic understanding that being free and well-being means cultivate your individual aspirations and talents. Max Weber and Nietzsche say real human freedom and autonomy means creating our own values. They're coming at the end of this whole line. And modern technologists think that the highest form of human life is powerfully solving all problems, achieving technological maturity in a solved world, maximizing utility, and optimizing all options. Okay, now I'm just going to wrap up. I feel like my punchline is like 5 minutes left, or where am I? Yeah. The last things I've been saying is really an attempt to illuminate what Heidegger started to say in Being and Time. Because he's the one at points he started to say, what is it? What are we as human beings? That we have this long history just in the West of all these different interpretations of what it means to be human. And so he started to think maybe what we are, maybe there's no one overarching nature of being human, but maybe our nature is to be the entity who cares about what we are. And that's what he calls Dasein and Being in Time. Dasein is a German word that means being there. And so he uses as a technical term to say, to give this new kind of overarching interpretation of what it means to be human, that we are the entities who care about what it means to be what we are. And the way he puts that is Dasein is the entity whose own being is an issue for it. The various interpretations of human well-being and autonomy are just various ways that the structure of Dasein's caring gets filled out. There is a whole history of interpretations of what is worthy of our care. That's what my potted history is, a history of interpretations of what's worthy of human care. This is other phraseology that Heidegger uses. We disclose the world as a field of mattering. And a lot of my examples have been trying to channel that. We are self-interpreting beings whose nature is defined by what we care about. So I'm going to end just with this. Heidegger shows or helps us see that actually our caring way of being is such that it can misunderstand itself. We can systematically misunderstand this nature that we are to be the beings who care about what we are. An ontology of values is one of these cover-ups, because value tends to cover up the care that it claims to represent. An ontology of values covers up and misconstrues the structure of care. Values are an ontological self-misunderstanding, at least if they're brought about like these, that we can appeal to them as final explanatory tools. Our caring is such that it can be usurped, diluted, and offloaded in our social practices. This is a kind of downstream of this more highfalutin phrase that I said, ontological misunderstanding. When we think of ourselves as a simple like scientist going around in the world, all that we're doing is mapping values onto what's out there and trying to understand what we are and trying to understand the world. In the Heideggerian view, this comes at things very late. First of all, we have a caring, involved mode of being in the world. Westerners create scientific objectivity as a variation on being in the world, but then we generalize it. And we generalize the stance of objective scientific detachment and try to explain ourselves in terms of it. That's values is part of that kind of explanatory strategy. Heidegger wants to argue that it's a misunderstanding of ourselves. And the fact that we can misunderstand ourselves is connected to the way our caring can be usurped, diluted, and offloaded in our social practices. This is a issue that in the AI literature, I think actually is a really cool thing that Stuart Russell ends his book, Human Compatible, by talking about what he calls the problem of human enfeeblement. And the expression I have of it up on the screen is from the Dan Hendricks book, Introduction to AI Safety and Ethics. I've got a longer riff about what I think is interesting and wrong-headed in this expression, but I'll just end by saying, pointing out what he says here, I think it's best understood as an enfeeblement of our capacities to care, not just an enfeeblement of our capacities for autonomy or rationality. So he says, the gradual process of turning over more and more responsibility to AI could eventually lead to the delegation of nearly all intellectual and eventually physical labor to AIs. In such a world, people might have few incentives to gain knowledge and cultivate skills, potentially leading to a state of enfeeblement. And I want to say we should be thinking about this in terms of our capacities to care and what does it take to preserve and enhance or carry over capacities to care in a technological age. How do they change? How can we preserve them? How do they need to grow? And that is my picture of somebody who gave over the care of his child to a RoboCop and is now feeling empty and lost. Anyway, thank you.
Okay. Any question?
Thanks for
Thank you.
that talk. It's really interesting. I wonder if I could go back to your philosophical positions about value and care. It's a number of slides back.
Yeah.
Just to see, because one thing that stuck out to me is that care in your formulation is not presented. There it is not presented as a verb, but rather as a tendency. Right. So it is not it is not so much the act of caring or the doing of caring, but rather the tendency towards, or the attunement, or in other words, a potential for which would be then actualized in the act. But even your caring is only, again, a potential. It's a second order thing. You're drawn to tend, or you're tending to tend, to use the word in two different ways. So I was wondering what you think about whereas values are, I understand, are they're meant to be legible to those who are not involved in the act of care. And therefore they are alienable. They have been alienated from the actual work involved in the particular care, and they can be quantified, they can be exchanged, they can be turned into things that can be changed. But I guess I see in here that your formalism, I'm trying to turn this into a question. Your formulation here has care as itself a potential, and I was wondering if you anything to say about like the way that potential becomes actualized, and like how, I guess maybe how do we cultivate this attunement if we're worried about losing it in a technological age?
Thanks. That is useful to point out the way my formulations wobble on this question about, is it an activity or is it the readiness or tendency for the activity? And I think it's both. And the one way to see that is that it is it's a tendency insofar as it is, caring is never something we're finished with. So as long
as the exercise at the beginning.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And as long as you care about something, your involvement with it, your caring about it is always outstanding. There's still more to do. There's still more to be involved with. There's still more going on. I mean, as long as you care about being a musician, in my case, there's always more songs to write. There's always more practices to schedule. There's always more shows to play. There's new bands to start. So understanding yourself as a musician and caring about that as a way of being means that it goes on. It's projected into the future. And that's why it has this that's why that tendency part is built into the way I was trying to formulate it, the way I was formulating that it's still, it's open-ended, even though it's also ongoing.
Yes. I see that also in the way that a lot of the discussion of value was about sort of optimization, generally speaking, within a fixed frame or a frame whose meta frame is fixed, perhaps, that we're optimizing perhaps the way we optimize as well, but nevertheless, there's a sense of closure there that
Yes.
and certainly in the way people talk about, say, AI, that there's a sense that once we achieve super intelligence, it will know the answers to these. It will figure out the optimum. So there's a sense in which the values are closed off, and limited versions where care maintains that openness.
Yes.
And continuing this into the future, into possible different ways of understanding the present.
I think that's a really important way to formulate the contrast. Thank you. Jose?
So you mentioned towards the end this problem of preserving the forms of care, which
Yeah.
links to the saying. But in a sense, what is sort of the origin of care? Because there is the problem of preservation that you mentioned, because you might lose care that you currently have.
Mhm.
But what if you were trying as well to care for other things that you don't currently do? You mentioned the problem of enfeeblement, but on the flip side, there is the problem of realization. So in a sense, it seems like you ought to care for caring, because the more you care, the more realized you are, right?
Yeah.
But precisely because there seems to be this problem with offloading your care, it is clear that not everyone cares about caring. So
Nice.
how would you go about caring about it?
Nice. Awesome. Totally important point. And I think that, yeah, I want to adopt your phrase. I think one of the things we need to do in our modern technological age, where we're going to be more and more, our world is going to be more and more populated with entities and devices and agents who are there to take over care from us. That it's now an issue in a way that, an intensified issue to remind ourselves to care about care and not give ourselves over to the other narrative that's very readily available about the efficiency and optimization. I mean, this is what's going on in the mind of the people who formulate the problem of human enfeeblement, and they wonder, what are we going to do? What's going to be left over for us to do when machines can do more and more of our work? I always find this to be a curious worry in a certain sense, because it acts like we only care about stuff insofar as like we have to, or the way they formulate it in that last slide is that there's an incentive to do things. And once there's no more incentive to do things, then we're just going to sit around and not do anything. I think that there's perhaps some people who like the opportunity to sit around and do nothing. I do sometimes too, obviously. But and that's why, okay, I'm kind of talking myself out of the thing I was about to say. I guess I want to say that we need to remind ourselves of this caring way of being that we have, because there is the danger that we do give ourselves over to this other dominant narrative that's out there, that what it means to be human is to achieve this kind of technological mastery and give more and more over more and more of what we care about over to the machines. I think this is misunderstands what we are. I think we should remind ourselves that we get joy and connectedness and a sense of flourishing when we involve ourselves in projects that are about more than just efficiency, more than just optimization, and that connect us in a more sustainable way to being involved in the world that we love. I'm kind of filibustering now. Does it come back? Does what I say come back to you and help you out or reformulate what you said?
It definitely addresses part of it, but I think my concern is more, do you have agency on what you care about? Because then because certainly you can start caring about things you did before. We might find out if you have a child, for example, that now you care about this. Maybe you can stop caring about things you did, as you mentioned, but to what degree do you have agency in this? And if so, how can you make the process happen? Because as you mentioned with Abraham's case, there are things you care for that you might not want to care for. Do you even have a choice in that matter as well?
Yeah, I think generally this is part of what it means to care about caring, is the experience of care and the experience of love is one of these great possibilities of letting go of our autonomy, letting go of our will, and connecting with something that's bigger than us. That could just be a relationship. That could be a sense of connection to the ecological well-being of our planet. That could be a connection to the development of super intelligent machines that can take us to another phase of what it means to be human. So the point I want to bring out there is a sense of receptivity, of being open to something that can attract your attention, that can attract your allegiance, that can attract your commitment. And the attitude of being willful and of being choosing and of being rational and of needing a plan and of having metrics, all of that is a way that kind of gets in the way of a certain kind of receptivity, openness to something, to have something come along and attract you, solicit you, attract your love, and enable you to connect with it. And so that is intention with choice. And I think that's part of the beauty of it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Any other questions? We can also continue our conversation
Most of my
down there.
questions are like off the form, have you read X?
Cool.
I will say like, yeah, one comment then, because I don't have any questions done on that, is that like, this reminds me a lot of the quote I was telling you about the other day from C.T. Nguyen on this idea of data. Like you change the word value for data.
Yeah.
Like they're largely synonymous to many in the sort of like utilitarian crowd anyway, I would argue. And there's this great quote, right, where it's like the power of data is its portability and the price is contextuality. And it's exactly the same thing about values, right? Like this great way of saying like, look, I've externalized some things I care about. I can now share them around much more than I can share what my soul looks like. But like the very price I pay for this is precisely what they actually represent, like the context within they were taken, you know? And I think there's a lot to be linked between sort of like modern thought on data science and modern thought on like utilitarian value stuff, because largely analogous stories, I would say.
Yeah.
That and the tweet, this reminded me of the tweet where the person's like, I was told the AIs would do all the boring jobs so that I could have my free time to make music and draw pictures. And instead, the AI is making music and drawing pictures while I am in Zoom meetings all day. Like this idea that like, in some sense, care is like a political act. It's an act of rebellion. Like, yeah, going back to Jose's point, like how much freedom do we actually have about our care? The answer is like decreasingly so, depending on larger social context sometimes, right? Like,
yes,
it's a very political act to like
nice.
care about something.
Thank you. I really like that formulation. And one of the things I'm coming out of this bit of the discussion with is realizing that this is a part of the argument that I want to work out more and develop more. This question of, what is the fate of care? What does it mean to care about care? In what sense are we in danger? What does it mean to say we're losing or diminishing our capacities to care? In a line that I like to say, but I need to think more about to work out the details of. And your formulation there of care as a political act, I want to absorb into the
I
argument.
would be like aggressive enough to say that we're not losing care, it is being taken from us. Like, but maybe that's it's a very opinionated point of view.
Yes.
I'll stop.
Yeah, I think it's both. I mean, the Heideggerian view, which I think in the Max Weberian view, is that these are large historical forces that are beyond any individual's plan, but within which there are individuals who are doing this purposefully creating systems and engaging in power structures to make it more difficult for people to care.
Thank you again.